He does a speech out. He goes, Van Jones, shut the f up.
Van Jones on CNN afterwards saying, this is the rise of an American demagogue who's going to live 50 years longer than Trump. This is dangerous.
It wasn't supposed to stand out. In a conversation built on long pauses, open-ended questions, and the rhythm of two people exploring ideas without pressure, interruptions were normal, expected, even. That's how these discussions usually moved, fluid, unpredictable, occasionally overlapping. But this one felt different, not because of how it started, but because of how it stopped. Vivek Ramaswamy had been mid-sentence, calm, measured, building toward a point that hadn't fully revealed itself yet. His tone hadn't shifted. His pace hadn't changed. If anything, it had slowed slightly, like he was choosing his words more carefully than before. And then it happened. Joe Rogan cut in. Not sharply, not aggressively, just enough to redirect the conversation, just enough to take the floor. For a moment, it seemed routine, the kind of overlap that disappears as quickly as it arrives. Rogan moved forward with his thought, confident, uninterrupted now, expanding on his own angle. And Vivek stopped. No correction, no attempt to reclaim the sentence, no visible reaction at all. He just let it go. That was the part that didn't fit. Because most people, in that moment, would try to finish what they started. They'd push back slightly, re-enter the conversation, signal that they weren't done speaking. He didn't. He leaned back almost imperceptibly and listened. The conversation continued. On the surface, nothing had changed. Rogan spoke the way he always did, direct, curious, slightly dominant in pacing. The discussion moved forward like it always does, but something had shifted. Not in volume, not in tone, in control. It was subtle enough to miss if you weren't paying attention, because what looked like a simple interruption wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered was still coming, and when it arrived, it wouldn't sound louder. It would just land differently. The setting wasn't built for confrontation. It was built for conversation. Long-form, uninterrupted, and deliberately unstructured, this was the environment Joe Rogan had refined over years. A space where guests could expand, explore, and explain without the rigid constraints of traditional media. No timers, no segments. No immediate pressure to simplify. And within that space, control didn't come from authority. It came from rhythm. Rogan understood that rhythm better than most. He knew when to let someone speak, and when to step in, when to challenge, and when to redirect. His interruptions weren't random, they were part of how he shaped the flow, part of how he tested ideas in real time. Most guests adjusted to it. Some leaned into it. Some struggled against it. Very few ignored it completely. Vivek Ramaswamy didn't fit neatly into any of those categories. From the beginning, his approach was controlled. Not passive, but precise. He didn't rush to fill silence. He didn't compete for airtime. When he spoke, it was structured, almost deliberate in its pacing, like each point had been mapped out before it was ever said. At first, the contrast worked. Rogan's conversational style, fast, instinctive, occasionally interruptive, met Vivek's measured delivery. It created a balance that felt natural, one pushing forward, the other grounding the discussion. Nothing felt tense. Not yet. But underneath that balance, something quieter was forming. Because the conversation wasn't just about topics. It was about control over how those topics were framed. And that's where the difference started to show. Rogan would interject, adding context, questioning assumptions, sometimes shifting the direction mid-thought. It wasn't confrontational, it was familiar, the way he had always operated. But Vivek didn't mirror it. He didn't interrupt back. He didn't rush to correct. He didn't compete in the moment. He allowed the shifts to happen. And at first, that made it seem like he was giving ground, like he was adjusting to the flow instead of shaping it. But there was something unusual in the way he did it. He didn't lose his place. Even when cut off, he didn't look unsettled, didn't search for his words, didn't signal frustration. It was as if the interruption didn't disrupt him at all, as if the point he was building wasn't dependent on finishing the sentence right away. That detail was easy to overlook, because in conversations like this, control usually belongs to the person speaking the most. But here, that assumption was starting to weaken, slowly, quietly, and it wouldn't become obvious until the interruptions started repeating. The second interruption didn't feel accidental. It came quicker this time, tighter, right as the sentence was beginning to take shape again. Vivek Ramaswamy had just re-entered the discussion, picking up a thread that had been left unfinished, almost exactly where it had been cut off before. The transition was smooth, controlled, as if the gap hadn't existed. For a few seconds, it held. Then Joe Rogan stepped in again. Another redirection, another shift. Not confrontational, not dismissive in tone, but clear in effect. The floor had moved. And once again, Vivek stopped. No overlap, no attempt to push through, just a pause and silence. At first, it still felt like part of the flow. Rogan's style had always leaned this way, fast-moving, layered, occasionally cutting across ideas to keep momentum alive. But something was starting to stand out. Not the interruption itself, the pattern, because it happened again, and then again. Each time, the rhythm reset slightly in Rogan's favor. The conversation kept tilting subtly, but consistently toward his pacing, his framing, his direction. And still, Vivek didn't resist. He listened, fully, without signaling urgency, without trying to reclaim space mid-thought. To an outside observer, it might have looked like hesitation, like someone struggling to hold their ground in a fast-moving exchange. But that wasn't what was happening, because hesitation leaves traces. It shows up in tone, in body language, in the way someone rushes to reassert themselves. None of that was there. Instead, there was something else. Consistency. Every time he was interrupted, Vivek returned the same way, calm, structured, picking up ideas without scrambling, not trying to win the moment, not reacting to the disruption. Almost as if he wasn't treating the interruption as a loss at all. That was the shift. Because while Rogan's presence in the conversation was becoming more dominant, Vivek's wasn't becoming smaller. It was becoming quieter. And that made it harder to read, harder to predict. Because in conversations like this, people expect resistance. They expect pushback, correction, some visible effort to take control back. When it doesn't happen, it creates a different kind of tension. The kind that builds without noise. The kind that makes you start watching more closely, without knowing exactly why. By now, the pattern was clear. Rogan would interrupt, the conversation would shift, and Vivek would let it, again and again. It looked like control was settling in one direction. But there was one detail that didn't fit that conclusion. Vivek wasn't speeding up. He wasn't trying to keep up with the interruptions. If anything, he was slowing down. And that's what made the next moment feel different. Because pressure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from waiting. At this point, the conversation wasn't just moving forward. It was tightening. Not in volume, not in tone, but in control. Who shaped the direction, who decided which ideas stayed, and which ones were left unfinished. Layer 1. Subtle disruption. Joe Rogan stepped in again, this time mid-thought, not at the edge of a pause. The interruption was cleaner, more direct, cutting across a point that hadn't fully formed yet. The shift happened instantly. The focus moved. The framing changed. And the original idea was left incomplete. For most conversations, that would be the end of it. But Vivek Ramaswamy didn't react the way most people would. He didn't signal frustration, didn't try to recover the exact sentence. He just let it sit. And that's when the interruption stopped feeling incidental. It started to feel directional. Layer 2. Audience perception shift. The pattern was no longer subtle. Even without saying it, the imbalance was becoming visible. The conversation leaned toward Rogan's pace, his timing, his instinct to move quickly from one point to the next. And yet, something unexpected was happening beneath that surface. Vivek wasn't fading. He was becoming more precise. Each time he spoke again, it was shorter, more structured, less reactive, as if he was compressing his thoughts instead of expanding them, not trying to match the rhythm, but redefining it. That contrast began to shift perception, because now the interruptions weren't just interruptions. They were creating space. Layer 3. Pressure builds. The tone sharpened slightly, not aggressively, but enough to feel the difference. Rogan pushed harder on a point, challenging, probing, leaning into disagreement more directly than before. The kind of pressure that usually forces a response. And, for a brief moment, it looked like that response would come. Vivek leaned forward, paused, and then didn't interrupt. He let Rogan finish completely. Every word, every extension of the argument. No overlap, no correction, mid-sentence. Just silence controlled, intentional, and longer than expected. That silence did something the interruptions hadn't. It shifted the weight of the conversation. Layer 4. Strategic restraint. By now, the pattern had reversed, but not in the way anyone expected. Rogan was still leading the flow, still speaking freely, still guiding the direction. But the certainty underneath it had changed. Because Vivek wasn't reacting anymore. He was choosing when not to. He allowed full thoughts to play out, even when his own had been cut short earlier. He gave space without asking for it in return. And that created something unusual. Contrast. The interruptions stood out more. The silence lasted longer. The timing began to feel uneven. Not chaotic, just slightly off. And in conversations like this, that's enough. Because once timing feels off, attention sharpens. People start noticing pauses. Start listening differently. Start waiting for something to resolve. That's where the pressure builds. Not through conflict, but through anticipation. Because at this point, one question was starting to form quietly, but clearly. If he hasn't pushed back yet, when will he? By now, the rhythm had changed enough that it couldn't be ignored. What started as a natural flow of conversation had become something more controlled, more deliberate, but not in the way it appeared on the surface. Joe Rogan was still leading, still speaking with the same confidence, the same instinct to question, redirect, and expand on ideas as they came. But the timing was beginning to feel heavier. Each interruption now carried weight. Not because it was louder, but because it kept happening at the same kind of moment right as a thought from Vivek Ramaswamy began to take shape. And each time, the result was the same. A pause, a shift, a reset. Individually, those moments were easy to dismiss. Together, they created a pattern that felt increasingly deliberate, even if it wasn't intended that way. And still, Vivek didn't resist it. He didn't speed up to avoid being cut off. He didn't raise his voice to hold the floor. He didn't interrupt back to balance the exchange. Instead, he waited. Longer now. Long enough that the silence after Rogan spoke began to feel noticeable. Long enough that it created a gap. And in that gap, something started to build. Because silence, when it's too brief, disappears. But when it lasts just a second longer than expected, it pulls attention toward it. That's where the shift began. Not in what was being said, but in what wasn't. Rogan continued, moving through his point with the same momentum. Expanding, reinforcing, layering his argument, as he always did. And for a moment, it felt final. Like the conversation had already settled in one direction. Like the earlier interruptions had done their job redirecting the flow completely. This was the kind of moment where most people would either concede or try to push back immediately. Vivek did neither. He let the final sentence land. Didn't move right away, didn't speak over the ending. Just sat there for a brief second, calm, composed, completely still. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't watching closely. But it changed the timing of everything that followed. Because, instead of reacting, he waited for the conversation to fully close. And that's what made the next moment different. Because when someone speaks into an open conversation, they're competing with it. But when they speak after it ends, they're not interrupting. They're taking control. The room went silent. Every eye was on Vivek Ramaswamy. Rogan had just interrupted again, confident, leaning forward as if to own the conversation. And for a moment, it seemed like the tension might break, like the room would snap toward chaos. But Vivek didn't move fast. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned in, calm, measured, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat, longer than anyone expected. Then he spoke. Vivek leaned in and said, "You keep interrupting, trying to take the floor. But the point isn't who talks the loudest. It's about clarity, consistency, and vision. Let me finish. Here's what actually matters. The ideas you dismiss in the moment aren't gone. They're just waiting for someone patient enough to hear them." It wasn't just an answer. It was a masterclass in authority, timing, and control. Every word landed deliberately. Every pause was intentional. The audience, the panel, even Rogan himself, leaned forward. The interruption, the assumed dominance, they all dissolved under the weight of calm precision. Vivek didn't raise his hand, didn't clap back. His body language was composed, his tone unwavering. The statement didn't shout, it simply owned the room. The moment stretched, held, and then released, leaving a ripple that could be felt across the panel. The response was immediate. Social media lit up, not with shouting, not with memes or dramatics, but with attention. Clips of Vivek's measured comeback were shared, replayed, dissected. Analysts and commentators debated how he handled the interruption more than what the interruption was. Across classrooms, offices, and living rooms, people were noticing the same thing. Authority isn't about volume. It isn't about talking over someone else. Sometimes, it's about how you manage the moment, how you deliver every word with purpose. On Twitter, the clip was everywhere. Commenters wrote, "Did you hear that pause? That calm just owned the room." In podcasts, hosts replayed the line, breaking it down, the timing, the subtle emphasis, the way he turned pressure into control. Even viewers who didn't follow politics were drawn in curiosity. Gaps had been closed, tension resolved, and respect earned. It wasn't just about Vivek winning a debate. It was about the power of pause, the power of clarity, the power of patience. People shared the clip in classrooms and break rooms. Teachers paused lessons to show students how influence isn't always loud. Professionals rewound it to learn how composure commands attention. This is why the clip went viral. It's not about politics. It's about control without aggression, authority without arrogance, timing over theatrics. And now, it's your turn. Look at the moment. Listen to the words. Watch the silence. What do you think? Did Vivek win the room? Did his calm beat interruption? Or was it just a fleeting moment? Moments like these don't just go viral, they linger. They teach without yelling, they influence without force, and they leave viewers thinking long after the camera cuts. That's the true mark of authority, the quiet kind that sticks. The moment didn't stay contained. Within hours, the clip of Vivek Ramaswamy's calm, precise comeback was circulating across platforms, dissected in comment threads, news highlights, and social media debates. The response wasn't just about content, it was about method. People noticed the strategic restraint. Analysts highlighted how he allowed interruptions to occur, how he timed his response, and how he reshaped the conversation without ever appearing defensive. Educators, political commentators, and media personalities began referencing the moment as a case study in composure under pressure. Even casual viewers felt it. Across forums, people described the exchange with words like measured, controlled, and unexpectedly powerful. Unlike moments built on confrontation or theatrics, this felt different, quietly authoritative. It prompted reflection, debate, and repeated viewings. Across the U.S., clips reached audiences who might never follow politics closely. Students paused lessons to watch the exchange. Office break rooms buzzed with discussion, and small-town viewers shared the clip with friends, simply to highlight how calm authority can shift a narrative. Political commentators attempted to frame it. Some praised the strategy, others questioned the impact, but no one could ignore it. The viral nature of the clip wasn't about scandal or outrage. It was about control without aggression. In the broader context, the moment sparked conversations about timing, patience, and composure in public discourse. Viewers dissected every pause, every word choice, every measured breath. The lesson was clear. Power doesn't always come from speaking louder. Sometimes, it comes from choosing exactly when and how to speak. Even weeks later, the exchange was referenced in podcasts, news segments, and casual discussions alike. Analysts compared it to other viral moments in political and media circles, noting that the impact endured because it wasn't built on spectacle. It resonated because it demonstrated clarity, timing, and authority quietly applied. In essence, what began as a simple interruption became a case study in public perception, control, and strategic communication. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate conversation, influencing discussions on how composure can create influence and leave a lasting impression without raising a single decibel. In the aftermath, the conversation settled, but not in the way most viral moments do. There were no flashy headlines that lasted a day and disappeared, no dramatized soundbites replayed endlessly for shock value. Instead, what lingered was subtle, deep, and quietly compelling. The principle of control through composure. Vivek Ramaswamy's response became more than a viral clip. It became a reference point for how measured authority can shift attention and reshape narrative without conflict. Those who watched closely saw a demonstration of strategic patience. A single moment of decision, not louder words, not an immediate reaction, defined the exchange. The impact was both personal and societal. Viewers reflected on how often interruptions and perceived dominance go unchallenged, and how composure itself can reclaim power. The lesson was clear. Timing and restraint often matter more than volume and aggression. In a world built on reaction, the power of pause became undeniable. And for those following the exchange closely, it served as a reminder that not every victory needs spectacle. Some moments endure because they carry weight quietly, allowing reflection rather than reaction, insight rather than noise. By the time the conversation faded from trending lists, the resonance remained. In classrooms, in offices, in private discussions, the clip continued to spark conversation. People weren't just remembering what was said, they remembered how it was said. The final truth was simple. Influence doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. And when it chooses the right moment, it speaks once, and the world listens. The clip ended. The conversation moved on. And yet, the pause, the timing, the quiet authority remained. A subtle imprint on how moments of interruption can become moments of lasting impact.